Hey, Brett Moravitz here. Welcome back to my channel. In this video, I'm going to show you how I convert this old, cheap, uncomfortable two-person ladder stand into this using only repurposed bolts and metal brackets from there with just drilling and cutting, no welding. I'm not exactly sure what brand of ladder stand this was or what the brand name of it is. But they made a lot of them when ladder stands first became real popular, maybe 10 years ago, 20 years ago. And this is the one that's got the half base and then half seat. And one of the reasons, and also has a shooting rail, which is folded down right now. One of the things I really didn't like about these is that they just were not comfortable. And that's a small platform. You really don't have anywhere to tuck your bag underneath. The seat is so close to the tree that you have to be sitting straight up. I felt like it was always just not enough seat room and not enough leg room or foot room on these things. And so by repurposing them into a porch for a box blind, I think it actually makes a better use out of the ladder. And it can be done with no welding and only using all the parts that already make up the ladder stand. So a quick look ahead here just for a visual. We're going to take this, remove all this stuff, and put it back together so that it ends up looking like this. The tools that you're going to need for this job include an angle grinder with a metal cutting wheel, a 13mm wrench and socket, a 10mm wrench and socket, a ratchet. I'm going to cheat a little and use an impact driver, a drill with a 1/4 inch drill bit and a 5/16 inch drill bit, a hammer and a punch. The hammer and punch is in case you get a nut stuck in a socket, which it does happen sometimes. It helps get the nut out of there. And also the punch helps line up the holes when you're putting the square tubing back together, and a tape measure and a Sharpie. And a pair of clamps will be helpful later on too, especially if you're doing this by yourself. So the first thing we're going to do is take off all the straps. I'm going to remove the lower ladder sections, and then we're going to just unbolt everything on top here. The shooting rail, the armrests here, and safety rails, the top seat, and the supports that hold the seat on underneath. So here's what it looks like all stripped down. We're going to reuse most of the parts. What we won't need is that and the brackets that held up the seat. And of course the ladder and the straps are kicked off to the side for now, but we're going to be using basically all of the rest of these parts again, reusing them. And you want to save all of the bolts and nuts and washers that you take off because almost all of them are going to get reused as well. Now back here on the platform area, there are these metal tabs that held that seat support on there. And those can either be cut off or just pounded down flat, because sticking up, they're going to be in the way just a little bit. So that's the first step you'll have to do with the part that's left over. Now that I've got those 4 tabs bent down, I've taken the seat portion and I've set it below the foot portion on the frame rails here, just below the tabs that were bent down. You don't want it resting and sitting on them because then it'll rock. So you get just underneath and then drop it. So it's sitting flat on the frame rails. And I've got it oriented so that there are 4 holes in the seat. There's one in the center of each set on each end, and then there's one out on the outside. You want to have it with the holes towards the bottom that are already in the seat frame, or the seat rail here, because if you put it upside down later on, there are some pre-drilled holes on the outside edge that we want towards the back. And if this were spun around, those 2 holes would be up here and they would serve no purpose later on. So orienting it this way saves you from having to drill 2 1/4 inch holes in there later. So what I'm going to do is take my 5/16 drill bit and drill through the rail underneath for these 4 spots and bolt them on. If you're new to DIY backyard fabrication, I've got a tech tip for you here. Oh, and by the way, the bolts that are going to go in here are the longer 13 millimeter bolts, and I'm reusing everything that I had before, and also the nylon washers. So it makes sense to drill one hole, throw in a bolt to line it up, go over the other side, drill a hole, drop your bolt in there to line it up. Rather than drilling all 4 holes and hoping that everything stays true, you might find that it's a fight to try and get some of those, the second, third, or fourth bolt in there if you just go and drill all the holes, because things tend to wiggle around when you're drilling and move out of place. This way, everything is just kind of perfectly lined up as you move on. So I drilled one, dropped a bolt, drilled one, dropped a bolt. I'm going to go down here, do the same thing, and then here for the 4th one, and they go right in. Next, I'm going to drill a 5/16 hole here and here, and those holes are marked 2 1/4 inch from the outside of the frame rail here, 2 1/4 to that spot. I'm going to center drill that 5/16 there and there. And the reason for that is, I'll use a one-handed demonstration here, is how we're going to mount this into the deer blind. This is a Spax screw. It's a 5/16 by 4 inch exterior construction screw. And when we get to the blind, we're going to tuck it up underneath. And just for demonstration purposes, let's say this 2x6 is the rim joist on your, or the outer joist on your deer blind. That's how we're gonna anchor it underneath there. And what the second hole does is that gives you a support option. This is really hard to do with one hand. What that does, then you can double up. So we'll say that this is actually your outer joist. That second hole is where that second screw, or I'd say the first screw, goes in to hold it up underneath your deer blind. And then you can piggyback this one, get another set of Spax screws into it, and then screw it underneath so that you've got basically 4 screws holding up that end versus 2. I'm comfortable with 2, but for safety reasons, and always do this at your own risk, gives you an option to just beef it up to have a little bit more, a little more support underneath there to hold it, especially if you're a bigger guy and you're afraid of those screws ripping out somehow. Next, I'm going to take those 2 seat support brackets that curl around. I'm going to unbolt. There's a short 10 millimeter bolt there that holds them together in that sleeve like that. Those both come off of there. We'll use those later. I'm going to save the 2 short bolts from those, because those will get used later. And then with the shooting rail, the shooting rest here, I'm going to cut both of them off. One of them from the seam here, I'm going to measure over 3 3/4 inches, cut it. That one stays bolted on. On the other end, I'm going to measure from the seam 7 inches, and I'm going to cut it off. And this one actually gets unbolted because this piece is going to be used as a extension for one of those other pieces up there. So here's my shooting rail bracket with the 7-inch piece has been taken out that I cut off. The 3-inch piece is still bolted on. These are those 2 seat brackets that we just kind of took those curly things off of there. And these seat brackets they've got a tab welded on them. So what I'm doing is I'm facing them with the tabs up, one going this way, one going that way. So this one here will fit into that 3-inch piece like that. So now I'm going to drill a 1/4 inch hole, throw that short 10 millimeter bolt in there to hold it together. And then on this side, this was that back support bracket that came off the blind. It's got a little bit shorter. When you round the corner there, they're a little bit shorter. That's why this had to be 7 inches. But in order to get it to fit in there all the way to where it will be snug, I'm going to cut off the end of this 7-inch piece right behind the hole here, right about here, so that when it goes into this side, it'll go in all the way like that, because it won't make it now. It won't round the bend. And then the other side will be fitted together too. So I'll end up putting a short bolt there and a short bolt there, and I'll have to, of course, drill a couple more holes to make that work with the 1/4 inch bit. You want to make sure to deburr those cuts because your hands are going to be running along here when you're going in and out of the blind later on. You don't want to cut your fingers. So I've paid careful attention to deburr those outside cuts on both sides there. And so now this is where I'm going to drill a 1/4 inch hole and run a short bolt. There's already a hole on the outside, but I'm going to go through there. And then over here on this one, it needs one right about there so that those will all be held together on the top side. All right, I got those holes drilled and those short 10mm bolts are in there and they're tight. Word of caution, when you're drilling through that crimped part with a 1/4 inch drill bit, it likes to eat drill bits. So do it gingerly. You might want to have an extra 1/4 inch drill bit on hand too. I did have a block laying under there when I was drilling through, so it's not because I hit concrete. It just likes to get caught up and bind up in that crimped part of the tubing. Next, I'm going to drill 4 more holes, 2 in each one. Hooked onto the top, and again, I've got these with the tabs sticking up, coming down from the top, 29 and a half. I'm going to drill a 1/4 inch hole straight through. And then hooked in the same spot on top, I'm going to come down and drill another hole through the other way, through this direction at 37 and a half. So one hole going through like that, one hole going through like that. And the reason for those holes, if you look over on the one that I've already got done, the 29 and a half hole goes in this way, and the 37 and a half hole goes in that way so that we can connect that L bracket later on. All right, so I grabbed one. This would be the right-hand side, I guess, if you're on the ladder. The tab is sticking up. Longer 10mm bolt goes through right there. Another longer 10mm bolt goes through right there. So I can put those two on, the nuts on there, the nylon washers, then the nuts, tighten them, flip it over and do the same thing to the other side. Got a little more cutting next. So for the support arms coming down, I got the hole drilled there. I'm going to cut these off about a 1/2 inch south of that hole. Both sides, I'm going to cut that curve off too. About 1/2 inch below that hole right there. And then I've taken these 2 J-shaped brackets and from the tall ends here, measured from the outside, it came down 2 3/4, and I'm going to cut those off right there. And at the same time, I came down 3 3/4 from the end. And where I have that little crisscross, that's where I'm going to drill another 1/4 inch hole, 3 3/4 down from the end, before I cut it off. And then on the other end, I measured from here, 10 and a half inches, I'm going to drill a 1/4 inch hole. And then 1/2 inch past that hole, I'm going to cut it off at about 11 inches. So 2 cuts up there below the drill holes, 2 cuts up here above the drill holes, and then 2 cuts here and here outside of the drill holes. So I've got my L-shaped support brackets bolted on and tightened down, so it adds support. You wouldn't want to hang off of these things, but it creates some sturdiness to them. You're really just using it for balance when you're going up and down the ladder. Again, you don't want to be hanging out on the side of that thing because they're not built for that. They're not strong enough to do that with that kind of tubing, but it does give you just something to hang on to. And by adding that little bracket on there, it just gives it a lot of rigidity going that way. One other thing, just personal preference here, but this top step is bolted on to the ladder instead of welded for some reason. I'm not sure why they did that, but they did. Personal preference. I like it on the inside versus the outside because I feel like when you're going up the ladder, it's easier to step on that with it 2 more inches inward versus it being sticking out further than the other steps. I just think you're less likely to trip on it this way when you're climbing up and when you're stepping back down. Again, completely personal preference there. But that's it for assembly. Couple final thoughts with the build or assembly here. You want to just double check and make sure you've got all your bolts and nuts tight. And wouldn't hurt to throw some touch-up paint or primer or something on those cuts just to keep it from rusting any more than it has. So here's one more final look at the ladder platform after we attached it to our deer blind. This deer blind has 8-foot 4x4 post legs on it, so adding one more ladder section to this platform put it at just the right height. And I think it makes a really nice little porch landing for stepping inside and outside of the blind. Hey, if you like this video, don't forget to check out my channel for other videos that might be of interest to you. Thanks for watching, and we will see you in the next one.